Greetings, neighbors. This is Reflections, the show sponsored by the Paducah Cooperative Ministry that deals with the community religious affairs across this region. We're glad you're here with us. My name's Gregory Waldrop. I'm the pastor at Fountain Avenue United Methodist Church, and I'm one of your co-hosts. Our other co-host is Karen Winkel, who's the pastor at Unity Church.
United Church of Paducah.
Church of Paducah.
Yeah, it used to be called Unity. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's good to be together.
Great.
Yeah.
To be right here with you.
And it's good to have you with us. Today we're going to be talking with Jay Gottman, who pastors at First Christian Church. And our topic today is when the pastor falls ill. I don't know about you two, but nothing in seminary prepared me for my own illness. We were, trained in ways of providing pastoral care, and it never dawned on me that there might be times when the pastor needs care. And so Jay's here to share with us about his experience, and so welcome, Jay. And you've been at First Christian Church exactly as long as I have. Tell us about your ministry at First Christian just a little bit.
Yes, thank you for having me here. I've been at First Christian since February 1st of 2005, and our ministry is doing great. And we're located at 415 Audubon Drive, right off of I-24 at Albin Barkley there at Audubon. And everything was going along just great until October of last year, October 2005. I'm coming up on a one-year anniversary of when my illness started. And it started out, I thought I had a sinus infection and went to the doctor and was prescribed a antibiotic that I'd had previously, and I'm allergic to lots of different things, and so this is one of the few I could take. And I started getting progressively worse throughout the week once I started taking this medication. And finally went into the hospital, and they thought that my gallbladder was bad and diseased and not functioning anymore. And so the obvious solution is no big deal. We'll do outpatient procedure, take out your gallbladder, and you'll be home next day. No big deal. Well, what happened was before the surgery, as you know, and many people probably know from surgery, is they give you antibiotics ahead of time so that you don't have infection from the surgery. Well, they started giving me more of the antibiotic that was causing the allergic reaction. And so that made my body look like it was even in worse shape to start off with. And so they took me back to surgery, and what was supposed to be laparoscopic outpatient procedure turned into full-blown surgery because during the surgery my body actually shut down. All my systems except for my heart failed, and sent me into the ICU for what turned out to be 6 weeks. And so I thought I was going to be in the hospital overnight, and it turned into me being out of it, literally. I was consciously sedated for a whole week.
Wow.
And so the odd thing is, when I woke up, this is the interesting part of the story to me, when I woke up, I assumed that it was same day. They'd taken out my gallbladder. Everything was fine, and all these people are around me looking very concerned.
Right.
And so the first clue I had that something was wrong was my brother, who's 3 years younger than me, who lives in Kansas City, walked into the room. And I thought, why are you here? Because this is just routine surgery. And as it turns out, they shared with me that things did not go as planned, and that I'd had major surgery, and I was just waking up after having been out of it for a week. And so that was a huge, huge blow to me, because I just assumed everything was okay. And it took me a while to realize what all was going on. I was intubated and had an NG tube in my nose, and I didn't realize any of that was going on until I tried to talk. And when I tried to cough, and they had to clear my airway. And as a minister and as a chaplain in a hospital, I'd seen them do that before, where they clean out the tube, and it looks horrible from the outside. And then it finally dawned on me that it was going to happen to me. And it was an eye-opener for me to be on the receiving end, not only of hospital care, but pastoral care. And also it was a very scary time for the members of our congregation. who by the way did a fantastic job of respecting my privacy and not inundating the hospital with constant visitors. They really were there prayerfully from a distance, and they were there to support my wife and my family. But at the same time, they had to continue on with the ministry of preaching and taking care of other issues in the church, and it was a real learning experience for everybody involved, because you don't expect a fairly young, healthy person to end up having major surgery when they thought it was going to be just an outpatient procedure.
Yeah.
And so what happened over the next 6 weeks, if it could go wrong, it did go wrong. I ended up getting out of the ICU after that first week and going up to the regular floor and beginning to feel better. But it took a long time for all the systems that had shut down to come back on board.
Yeah.
And I had to have dialysis, which I had never had before. Had to wake up all the systems in my body, digestive system, and make sure my lungs were okay and my kidneys were functioning. And so it's a blessing that I'm where I am today, because when everything starts to shut down, it's very hard to get everything going again.
Wow.
And it was a very trying time.
It's a important reminder, isn't it? We sort of focus on the spiritual often, and we almost sort of unconsciously imagine ourselves as sort of a disembodied brain or a disembodied spirit. But this reminds us that we are flesh and blood and breath, and just how connected and real and a part of that we are, isn't it?
Right. And the whole time I was in there, it was hard for me to formulate my own prayer, because I was in and out of it quite a bit, and I was also very worried and focused on, please, let me get out of here in one piece, or at least as many pieces as I can. And so the prayer that I fell back on most often was the Lord's Prayer. And the words took on significant meaning for me, and different meaning. I was used to praying it and meaning it on Sunday morning during service and in my prayer life. What I noticed was when I got to the part, "Let your will be done," that was a hard one spiritually for me to pray, because there were several times in there where I didn't know if God's will was for me to move on, or if I was going to be blessed and have the opportunity to stay and be with my family. And that was really hard to pray. And several of our church members, they started a monthly prayer service at the church while I was in the hospital to pray not only for me, but they recognized how important it was to pray for those in our congregation and to do it in a meaningful way. And several of them mentioned that when they would close with the Lord's Prayer, that it was hard for them to pray that prayer now, because they understood that what God's will isn't always what we want. And that was hard for me. I have 2 young children, a 6-year-old who is a first grader this year, and at the time a 2-year-old, and soon to be 3. And that was really hard on me, and of course my wife and family, to know that I may not be around to see them grow and to be there and to be supportive and to be a dad and a husband. And that was really hard.
Sure.
It was difficult.
It's interesting because I was a part of a couple of those early prayer sessions. I know they opened it to the community, and then when in middle of March, I discovered I had prostate cancer. I was a part of the prayers for that group. And it was this amazing kind of completion of a circle that they sent notice of their prayers and signed their names. One of the first mailings that I got, one of the first cards, came from First Christian in that prayer group. And
I really have a great sense of how powerful prayer is. I've always known it was a powerful influence in my life and in others, but to know, like you experienced, that congregations not only here in Paducah, but here in the west area of Kentucky, and even somehow some friends of mine from a previous congregation who now live in New Zealand had heard about my experience, and so they put me on their prayer list, and it's a comforting feeling to know that there are people all over who are praying about and thinking about you and wishing you the best, and knowing that, you know, whatever God chooses to do with your life, that they're supportive of that and that they're going to be there. And everywhere I go, it's amazing. I'll meet people from congregations that I've never set foot in. I don't know much about them, but they'll say, "Are you the one who was on our prayer list?"
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And in fact, I was in that 6-week stay in the hospital. I was able to go home for 16 hours. They thought I was ready to go home after the first 3 weeks, and I went home, and it turned out I went home too early, and I ended up having to go back to the emergency room and go back to the hospital. And as I was checking back into the hospital, the lady at the reception desk at Lourdes said, "Oh, I know who you are. You've been on our prayer list for weeks now."
Right.
And you know, it was a powerful reminder that it's so much bigger than any one congregation or denomination, that it really is the body of Christ that is there supporting one another.
Upholds us.
And I don't know about you. I went through treatment for early stage breast cancer, and I was in Utah. There was an article in the statewide paper, so there were people all over the state praying, and of course all this, you know, network of people that knew me or, you know, were connected somehow to members of my congregation, and I knew that they were praying for me, but I began to feel that. And my experience was that I felt that I was in what I would call a golden bubble, and it was quite large. And in that space, I only felt peace. You know, I knew what was going on. I knew, you know, there was knowledge that I had about my course of treatment that could have made me on another day anxious or have some worry or a question mark, is this going to be effective? And in that space, I only felt peace, and I could watch, you know, things that would ordinarily, you know, cause me some sort of upset or trouble kind of come only so far and then couldn't come into that space. And people would say to me, "Oh, you're handling this so well, you know, you've got, you know, such a good attitude." And I said, if you had this many people praying for you and were surrounded with this, you would know that this is just a gift to me. It's not anything that I'm choosing. It's being given.
And it is very powerful to know that there are people out there praying for you. And I had some very physical reminders of that, because every day I'd get 10 to 20 cards in the mail. And, you know, at some point I was even too weak to open the cards, but my wife would come in during visiting hours, and she'd be there from 6 a.m. in the morning until 10 or 11 at night, and she would bring those cards in every single day, and she would read them to me, and I would feel that love that was around me. And the other interesting thing was I'm on a first name and close relationship with all of the nurses in the ICU at Lourdes now, because they became like a second family to me. I was there so long, and they got to know me very intimately, and they treated me with dignity and respect, and they were supportive. And I remember one occasion when I had another setback. I had blood clots develop in my legs, and it sometimes happens in one leg or the other, but I had both, and they were traveling up to my lungs, and, you know, that was potentially life-threatening. And I remember asking one of the ICU nurses, you know, because this was my third time back in the ICU, I said, "Am I going to make it?" Because I trusted them enough for them to be honest with me and say, you know, "It doesn't look good," or "Yeah, you'll be fine." And they were really good about not sugarcoating anything. And she looked at me and she said, "You're going to be just fine." And so that helped me get through one of the most difficult days of the 40 that I was in the hospital, really knowing that people were honest with me. And the thing I appreciated the most too, as you all know from experiences in the medical community, if you know what's going to happen, or if they explain what they're going to do and why they're going to do it, that that helps
Oh, yeah.
take away a lot of the fear, because it is scary not knowing.
Right. It's a foreign environment, isn't it? It's an alien world. And I know I had this experience a little differently imaged than yours. When I got this word of cancer, I sort of felt like this little bitty person that was beset by this great big disease, this powerful disease. And then very quickly, I told the church and began to get the support and care of that. And all of a sudden, this platform on which this little bitty person, me, was standing grew a bit. And then the cards and the letters and the prayers support, and it became bigger. And then all of a sudden, again, very quickly, the medical community added in their work and ways and care. In many ways, there was a lot of care expressed even in that as well. And all of a sudden, I never got over the feeling that I was a little bitty person in the face of this, but all of a sudden I felt like I had this great big base out of which to operate that came from these folks who had joined me in prayer and care, and from the medical community that also had gave their lives through their disciplines to help tackle and face and confront this cancer. And so eventually I felt bigger than cancer. I mean, I didn't feel bigger, but the platform out of which I was operating felt larger. And it was this, this amazing notion of having felt puny in front of in the face of this, and then by the connections with all of these ways to feel, in fact, capable of tackling this, looking it in the eye and continuing on.
Right, and that's where, to me, the faith community comes in that, sometimes we come across people who think they can have a personal relationship with God, and they can, on their own, and they don't need to be a part of anything bigger than themselves. And I really was struck by the notion that, what do people do if they don't have that base that they can build upon? And my family was taken care of.
Right.
We had church groups that we're not affiliated with who would bring food to the house. In addition to our own church members, we had people volunteering to watch our kids if need be, even though my mother-in-law was here and she stayed. She thought she was going to be here for 4 days, and it turned into 7 weeks. And she was retired and gave her time so that my wife could be with me and take care of the kids. But to know that all these different churches, this was in the fall, they came and raked leaves from Broadway Church of Christ. I mean, it was amazing how the communities of faith kind of came together.
Yeah.
And so I wonder how people out in the community who aren't connected in that way make it through, because I know it would have been a longer road for me, and I would not have bounced back as quickly.
Yeah.
And as you're speaking, it's occurring to me, it's a gift that we give ourselves by being part of a community, either to participate in supporting someone or to have that there. But it's also a gift that we give to God, because God wants to be able to move. God wants to mobilize resources. And if we're in a position where we're isolated or not very well connected, that poses a challenge to God as well. And I don't know that I ever really thought about that until you lifted that up, because God is a generous God and a responsive God, but God works with what is to move. And
that's right. And I think that's what helped me get through, was that I've grown up in the church, and God has been with me through good and bad times, and I know how that works with me. And so I have this deep well, or a big base to draw from my experience having grown up in the church. And so I think you're right. At some point, sometimes in crisis, people will turn to God, but there isn't that pre-existing relationship, and sometimes it's hard to understand or fully grasp how it is God is working with and through others to help us.
Right.
And one of the things I shared with our congregation my first Sunday back in the pulpit was that in my experience, I feel like I was blessed. Whether I died or not, I felt like God had prepared me for what was to happen one way or the other. And having been prepared spiritually, I also knew to be prepared physically in this world. You know, I shared with folks, you got to have a will. You have to have life insurance. You know, you have to think about, you know, what's going to happen to your family if something happens to you. And we all pray that something doesn't happen to us. But if it does, are we prepared? Are we ready? And I think a spiritual component is key to that preparedness as well, because we just never know what's going to happen. I look at each day very differently now than I did a year ago. Each minute is a gift to me.
Yeah.
Each time I see my kids and get to play with them, or see my son smile, or hear my daughter talk about her day, that's a whole different feeling for me than it was even a year ago.
Yeah.
And
Which isn't to say you weren't appreciative then, you weren't attentive then, but it does provide a way to understand the true preciousness of life. I remember the day that I discovered that the gap between living and dying wasn't huge, that it is this slender little thread, and it can all, you know, it can change in a moment, and that heightened your awareness clearly of the preciousness of your life. Well, I know that you were a steward, a good steward of the experience that you had, as you know, scary as it was, as fraught with tension and drama. You were a good steward of that you did a sermon series to have a conversation over time with your congregation about some of the lessons that you learned. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Right. One of the things I felt was important, because the congregation did respect my family's wishes of, you know, please let's not have 50 people over in the ICU waiting room every day, and please, you know, don't call the home all the time. We'll give you all the information that we feel like we can, and disseminate it that way, so that, you know, my wife wasn't constantly being asked to repeat the same thing over and over again.
Right.
And so I felt, as a faithful steward of my time with the congregation, I thought it was important when I got back to let them know what happened, and to give them the details that I thought were necessary, and then also to tie it in with my faith journey. Because I know several in all of our congregations have had life-threatening experiences, and they've been where I've been. And so I thought it was important to tie in my faith experience and my fears and my joys and, you know, the blessings that I found along the way with the congregation, so that I could connect with them in a way that let them know that how much I appreciated them, and how important it was that the congregation was praying for me, and how special it was that they carried on the ministry of the church literally for 3 months without my presence, without any direction from me, and not only did it well, but continued on and even grew the ministries that we were doing. And so I felt it was important to share and to let them know that the scriptures were important to me, and how they impacted my life, and how my prayer life had changed, and also how it's important for us to see that each day we have from God is truly a gift.
Yeah.
And so it worked out really well. I did a 6-week series, and it literally chronicled each week that I was in the hospital, and it worked out really well because there were distinct phases. The first week I was completely out of it. The second week I was trying to get my bearings on what had happened to me, that I'd almost died, and was very thankful to be alive. That I got to go home. There was one sermon called The Prodigal Patient, because I ended up having to come back to the hospital, even though every fiber of my being said I don't want to go back. My wife and I both knew I had to. One of the sermons was on, if it can go wrong, it will go wrong, because I had several setbacks that, you know, put me on death's door a couple of times. And then finally, the third time was the charm. I went in and out of the ICU 3 times. And the last time I was actually discharged from the hospital from the ICU, which doesn't happen very often.
Really?
Normally they move you to a floor and then you leave the hospital that way. But that was part of I felt safe in the ICU, and it was hard to go home. I think one of the things I learned was I'd become so dependent upon the ICU. I knew that people were there to help me, and all I had to do was press a little button, and they would be there in 10 seconds or less. And to go home, even though we live about 2 minutes from the hospital, my safety net was gone. Even though my wife is a nurse practitioner and can take care of me, it was scary to go home. And the biggest thing I had to overcome was I was fearful of going to sleep at night, just because I didn't know if I'd wake up the next morning. And you know, even now, it's not as bad, but even now, I feel every little ache or pain, and I wonder, is that something major about ready to go wrong with me?
Right.
Just because I had to be so aware of my body when I was in the hospital.
I shared with you that sort of humbling notion that in many moments in my ministry when I have been disabled for some reason or another, the church has gotten along maybe even better, flourished more than ever. I can remember a couple of other occasions, and I'm not just humbled, but it's made me realize that maybe one of the best things we have to offer, not just as pastors, but as humans, it's not just our ability to love, but our ability to be loved.
Yes.
By our willingness to allow others to care for us.
That vulnerability that makes us needful of others and open to receive what they have to give. Well, we could talk for another year because there's so much. Of course, we're so grateful that you're here and in good health, and grateful also for the ministry of the stewardship of this experience that you wouldn't choose but came your way. So I thank you for the testimony of your faith and ask God's blessing upon you. Gregory, do you want to send us out?
Yeah, I will. I want you all to know that the programs are archived on Paducah2.org. And if you'd like to see this show or other shows that we've done, you can go to the website Paducah2.org, and we'll see you then. And you can see these shows. We're glad you were here. We're glad that you're part of the Paducah Cooperative Ministry who does God's work with human hands in every way. We'll see you next time.
Shalom.
Shalom.